My guest today is Stephanie Cotsirilos. She is the author of the novella Xanthi and published finalist in Mississippi Review's Prize in Fiction. She writes about humor, injustice, and the resilience of the human heart. She has just published this year her novella Xanthi, which tells a deeply personal story. So welcome, Stephanie, to the Bookshelf Odyssey Podcast.
Thank you, Art. It's great to be here. It's really lovely to meet you.
Yes, you too. We were just talking off camera. One of the things I like about this is just meeting all the new friends and people around the United States that have wonderful stories to tell, both of their own personal life as well as in written word. And I can tell already, I think you're going to hit both of those. So you have such an interesting story of your own life as well as your story novella sounds just incredible. Well, before we get started, tell us just a little bit about yourself, about who you are and what you do.
Well, sure. First of all, Art, it's kind of fun that we both have the Midwest in common. And I know you're speaking from Iowa today. And I'm living in Portland, Maine, but I was born in Chicago into a Greek-American family. And my very first language was Greek, not English. So I feel as though I had a tremendous advantage, really, because my parents took the time and had the wisdom to teach me Greek first, which is going to connect to my novella when we get around to talking about that. Mm-hmm. I loved singing and dancing and all kinds of artistic things when I was a child in Chicago. And at one point when I was maybe 5, 6, apparently somebody asked me, "What's your name, little girl?" And I said, "Judy Garland." And so obviously I'm not Judy Garland, but my Greek grandmothers on both sides were absolutely horrified because this was not considered art to be something that a Greek-American woman of good repute would do, is to go into the performing arts. This is not why my forebears came to this country, they felt. But I did that anyway. I did get an education in comparative literature and in music, and I went to New York City and had my first career there in the performing arts. So I was an actor and singer on Broadway and off Broadway and elsewhere for about 15 years. So that was how my work life started. And even there, the writing began. Mm-hmm. I found, Art, that as much as I loved performing, I also wanted to say what I had to say. So I wrote one-woman shows, songs, and lyrics that I would perform after the show in the Manhattan Theater Club and other places in New York. So the writing began there. And after my husband died and I moved to Maine, I became a lawyer and began writing in a very, very different way, as you might imagine.
Yeah.
It's a very different kind of writing. But I'm not sorry for a bit. It hones your mind in a particular way. And ultimately, what happened in Maine was that I began counseling as a consultant, nonprofits in the arts, in social services, in social justice, and found myself, as luck would have it, as the interim executive director of the Portland Ballet. So there I was in the arts again. Mm-hmm. And I pulled law and the arts together and told myself, you now have to return to writing in a very different way, which, to be honest, I had already started to do after my husband died through memoir and forms like that. And that's where the most recent iteration of my life really started. I was accepted into writers' conferences, wrote stories, as you know, have written a novella, and I have an upcoming novel. So that's kind of it in a nutshell for me.
Yeah, it's fun how your life, like many others, just take all these trajectories, and and then you eventually end up, um, where you need to be at the right time.
That's how it feels. I said to another friend recently, I also want to acknowledge and honor the fact that um, I've been the beneficiary of extreme good fortune,
Mm.
meaning I'm alive, able to do these things. Um, had my forebears not come on the boat across those oceans, um, I would not be doing what I'm doing now. My
Mhm.
generation of Greek women would not really have had these opportunities. And so, yes, life sometimes offers you gifts, doesn't it? That,
Mhm.
pardon me, you almost say, well, I'm not sure what I did to deserve this one, but I'll try to do the best I can
Mhm.
with the good fortune.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, your story reminds me of my ancestors. I come from Norway. I have a lot of Norwegian
Wow.
relatives. They
Yeah.
came over. I think it was either late 1700s, early 1800s, around that
Ah.
time. And back in the was early in 1900s. Now, I had an uncle who had come directly from Norway, and he had come over and well, his family did, excuse me, and he was a young kid at the time and just really enjoyed painting and drawing. Come from a family of farmers and hard workers, so this was
Yeah.
kind of unusual for them to have a kid who liked that
Yeah.
stuff. But
Right.
and then if I remember right, it was his father died rather unexpectedly. He was a young boy, like 10 years old, and knew that, okay, I got to be the man of the house now. And so he took all of his art supplies and things, and he burned them, which sounds horrible to me. But he said, I've got to focus on work and helping to support my family. So he wanted to get rid of any distraction. This story does have a happy ending though. But so for a long time, he worked hard. He helped his mom, all these things. And he grew up getting, I'd say probably around my age or so, maybe a little older now. And so then his sisters sent him an art kit one year for his birthday and said, we remembered you used to like to draw. So, why don't you try it again? He had learned blacksmithing in that time. That's how he had paid. So he started drawing and painting again, and ended up becoming a very famous for the time, like a Western painter. He'd paint scenes of cowboys and cattle and
My
stuff
goodness.
like that. Yeah, yeah. If you go, I think it's in the North Dakota Art Museum or somewhere. He has some paintings on display there. So it's anyway, all that long story to say, that sometimes your life takes a different trajectory, and hardships change things. But I always like to think he always had this dream in the back of his head that someday I'll get back to it again.
Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah, yeah. So we have family history that came over. I'm so grateful. We look at America as the land of opportunity, and that certainly is the history of my family. That
Yeah.
they had opportunity. A lot of interesting characters in it.
Yeah. That's a wonderful story. And what attracts me, what resonates in that story for me is that what you, the arts, for example, are not always the thing that you can do right away,
Hmm.
or they aren't respected necessarily, as with my grandmothers who really
Mm.
wanted something else for their grandchildren. So you might come back to them in a very circuitous way. The irony in my particular case is I am convinced that my grandmothers could not read
Mm.
what I have written, because in those days, um, well, I should back up for a second to say one of my grandmothers was illiterate,
Hmm.
actually. She was forbidden to learn to read when she was a young girl in Greece.
Mm.
And for whatever the reasons, that stayed with her. She was a very smart woman, but she never really mastered reading and writing in any language. The other grandmother could read and write, for sure. Neither one was really comfortable in English. What an irony. They wanted their children and their grandchildren to succeed in the United States, but they themselves never really committed themselves to English um, for whatever, as I say, their reasons. So they're in my mind a lot when
Hmm.
I write what I write, because I write about my Greek heritage. And I hope they'd be proud of me. But art, they would not pick up what I've written and read it. And that's okay.
Hmm.
That was our trajectory.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting that many still even view the arts as I don't want to say not important, but
Yeah,
you know, why don't you get a real job kind of attitude, um, we
right.
we see it even on in some cases in like school boards and things where they
Wow.
cut the money from the art department or the music department. My oldest son is in college right now. He's studying to be a music teacher,
Oh,
and
good.
he loves music. He's so passionate about it, so good at it. But he said even there, they at one time were thinking of doing away with the music program altogether
Mm.
because it wasn't making them money like the football team would. And he said, fortunately, wiser heads prevailed on that because you have to have that. I think you have to have that creative outlet, to and that ability to create. It's just vital.
I couldn't agree more. I have a very dear friend who is a member of the Penobscot Nation here
Hmm.
in Maine. And that leads me to something else eventually, but I'll stick with this point first.
Hmm.
She is very, very wise in understanding that um, communicating the story of her history and her legacy and what it means to be a Native American, an Indigenous person here in Maine, often depends on communicating that through the arts, either through stories or music or theater, because it communicates in a way that some things cannot.
Hmm.
And I have seen her make enormous impact on people when she uses the arts to communicate her story. It's very, very important to me because my son is an Indigenous person as well. My late husband and I adopted him from the country of Peru,
Hmm.
and my beloved son is an Indigenous Peruvian. So his legacy and what he brings into our family with him really is a different story than the Greek lineage that I bring to the family.
Hmm.
And the music is different. The You can list all the things that are different. We are extremely close. I mean, there is nobody more beloved to me than my son.
Hmm.
And communicating through the arts and hearing what our different heritage is very important.
Hmm.
We don't do it so terribly often, but you hear the difference the minute you hear the music, for example.
Yeah.
The minute you hear the music, it's really wonderful.
Yeah, and it tells a different story and in a different way, and it's such a powerful medium. I always talk about words having power, and stories have power. Music has power,
Oh,
and so many of those things can help bridge cultures and help you understand somebody else better. And it's, I guess, to go back to the comment you made about your grandmother being illiterate. I am more and more just so thankful that my grandma was always just putting a book in my hands saying try this, read this, and she encouraged that love of reading that like even through this podcast I still
mm,
I'm just exploring reading in a different way.
right.
And I consider myself very privileged, grateful, I don't know what, to have
Sure.
had that in my life. I'm so thankful for it. Yeah.
Absolutely. It is, as I said, a great gift that you
Gift,
get.
yeah.
And you do the best with it that you can.
Yeah.
And look at your son. See, look at that.
Yep.
He's going to be a music teacher. What instrument does he play?
Well, he plays a couple. His primary is piano, and he's
Okay.
been playing that since he was 8, maybe. He loved it, and then in high school, he picked up the trombone and started in choir. We had never really heard him sing before, and then he mentioned he was trying out for the musical at the school, and we were like, oh, you have to actually sing out loud then, and he's like, okay, yeah, well, whatever, it's fine. And we're like, okay, but we never heard him sing until the opening night. They did Seussical the musical. If you're familiar with that, it's like tells the story of Horton the elephant with Dr. Seuss
Oh,
stories. And so he played the main role, and he had solos and all this. And the first time he started singing, my wife and I looked at each other like, wow, that's really good. Where did he learn that from? But I will always credit his teachers. They saw some musical talent in him, and they just gave him every opportunity they could find for him. And I'm so grateful. We have such a wonderful school district that
oh, it's
just promotes the kids' talents and strives to help them find what they can do, and gives
great.
them opportunities. Yeah, yeah. All
It's so important. We really need to nurture the
mm,
breadth and honesty and depth of our school districts, our schools, because look what happens. You
mm-hmm,
change people's lives that way, right?
mm-hmm. Yep,
Oh,
yep. And I have two other kids. They're going to the school too, and they're just all doing great. Finding teachers that influence them and encourage them, and help them find what they're good at, or what they enjoy doing, and then give them opportunities to do that. My middle son, he's really been enjoying drawing, and so he's been in an art class, and he's had a good teacher there. My daughter, she loves singing, so they've been helping her try out for different honor choirs and things that it's just wonderful. So yeah, yeah.
that's great. You know, the music is going to be part of an event that I am having on October 21st at a gallery here in Portland,
Mm-hmm,
where I'm going to be reading from my novella, my
mm-hmm,
Xanthi, but I will also have a musician there to play Greek music on original Middle Eastern instruments at the
mm-hmm,
same time. Because, as you say, the power of music is enormous. And I thought to myself, let me read from this book, which has letters from the main character in it, letters that she writes to her daughter. Let me read from those letters and then have those interspersed with the music that character must have grown up with in
mm-hmm.
Greece, what she would have heard since she was a baby. And it will not only be beautiful, I'm sure, because the artist who's going to be playing is a wonderful
Mm.
stringed instrumentalist, but it will give the audience um, an understanding of her attitude and what she has brought to the situation.
Mm.
Um, because the novella has a lot to do with immigration
Mhm.
and migrating, people who come from one country to another. Um, you had mentioned in some of our introductory emails to one another that you were interested in this idea of my saying there's a new hero, the migrant woman, the elder
Mhm.
migrant woman that I would like to talk about. And
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
if I
Yeah,
may.
let's go ahead and transition into that, talking about your book and that
Okay,
that idea. Yeah. So
sure.
tell us what you have in mind there.
Yeah, I will. This idea of concept of the elder migrant woman as a kind of hero in books is not only in my novella, but it's in stories that I've written before. And we write often from what we know, and we try to extend ourselves beyond what we know
Mm.
in some authentic way. So, one of my stories that was a published finalist for the Mississippi Review's prize in fiction, had an elder female character who really narrated the story unexpectedly. This story, and I will get to my novella in a minute, but this other story, whose name is Little Buzzcut, is about a little boy, a little Guatemalan boy, who is separated from his mother at the US-Mexico border during that terribly painful period of time when those family separations were coming to light in 2018. It probably goes without saying that I saw my own son's face on every child who was separated in that terrible way.
Yeah.
And I found that I had to write about it. So I wrote about a little boy, and I couldn't locate the voice to narrate the story because the little boy is very young, and he would not be able to narrate this story in the ways I wanted him to. I also wanted to tell about what this separation of families did to the Border Patrol agent who had to implement it. It has terrible impact sometimes on people who have to implement this thing. So I searched and searched, and I don't know where it came from, but the voice of a little boy's grandmother came to me. She was, in my imagination, deceased, and it was her voice and her spirit who came to the little boy and said, "Listen, hear me. I know what's happening to you. I'm here with you. You're going to make it, and I'm going to help you remember who you are so that they can never take that away from you." And she is the hero in the background of that story. She's an elder migrant. Well, she wasn't a migrant. She never made it to the United States, but her family did.
Sure.
So that was something I wrote. And then there was another story that had something vaguely similar. And then my novella, this one, Xanthi, absolutely has two main characters, one of whom is a criminal defense attorney who lives in the United States, and the elder Greek immigrant woman who helped raise him when he was a little boy. And it is her letters, her posthumous letters, that guide him through a very difficult time of his life. What happens is he has a daughter, he has two daughters and a wife, and he loves his family a great deal. He is, as I said, a defense lawyer, criminal defense. He defends people in death penalty cases because he is against the death penalty. And so that is what his work is. And one day his teenage daughter, as teenagers will do, said to him, challenges him. And she says, "Dad, how can you defend those people?" And he's got to give her a good answer. As it turns out, he has the letters from his old nanny, Xanthi, in his desk drawer, and he's been avoiding reading them because they came to him unasked for. Xanthi's daughter in Greece sent him this pile of letters, and he knows there's some secret in there that he's very reluctant to find out. But now that his daughter has asked him this kind of a hand grenade of a question, he says, okay, it's time for me to confront what her secrets were, because he knows that she had secrets from the Greek Civil War that she survived. And he reads her letters, and it leads him to reevaluating, coming to terms again with his values and what it means to talk about justice, whether that's even attainable, and why, as I put it in the book, the human heart needs a champion. Almost no matter what you've done, you need somebody to tell your story. And that's Xanthi. She teaches him that. And so she is the elder migrant hero in this book. That's what I mean by that.
Man, I've got chills. I'm gonna have to put that book on my TBR for sure. Yeah.
Oh, good.
I might need to start that real soon. I did have a quick question too about your short story. Is that available somewhere we can read
Yes,
that?
great question. The Mississippi Review does sell back issues, but the best thing to do, the easiest thing to do, is to go to my website.
Okay.
And I have, I believe now, yes, I have the whole story there because it's been enough years since it was published
Hmm.
that I've published the story online and people can read it there.
Okay.
Yeah.
They both just sound so powerful and really resonate with what we're dealing with as a culture right now, I think, in
Yes.
some ways. But yeah, there's, I don't know, telling that story, the story of your life, I guess it helps you realize that you matter and that your
Mhm.
story and your life matters.
Mhm.
Because, it is a story. It's and it can be used to encourage others.
Yes.
My story, my great uncle is
Yes.
Enar. I want to keep telling his story to people because I think it's an amazing story. He sacrificed at a young age, sacrificed what he loved doing
Ah,
because he wanted to help his family. And then later on, that was able to come back to him as a great blessing that he was able
hmm.
to embrace. And it's beautiful. It's really a beautiful story. And I've got others who, the my great grandpa who I'm named after. He started a nursing home and an orphanage in Wisconsin, and had another relative who, back in World War One, he decided to help with. I think it was Red Cross. He did
Mm.
worked with them instead of going to war, and just found ways to help, but um,
Yeah, it's
didn't want to
wonderful.
take lives or anything. He wanted to save them, I guess. So
Sure.
yeah, a lot of just powerful stories in our history. Not all, I mean, some are tragic,
Yes.
but I think those stories should be told too, um,
Yes.
as a warning, maybe even. Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. I
Mm,
think we need to acknowledge um, the hard things,
yeah.
or we can never really be whole because life is not like that. It's not only about the good stuff. Um, I think about Mike Xanthi, the novella, and I think about it not only as being about immigration, coming from another country to this
Mm,
country, in Xanthi's case, going back to Greece, but about displacement,
mm,
which is a broader concept for me, meaning this: there are people who didn't choose to immigrate to this country who are here,
mm-hmm,
namely people who were brought through the Middle Passage from Africa to the
mm-hmm,
United States against their will. That is an enormous displacement. Some argue that it's one of the biggest displacements, historical displacements, because of the Atlantic slave trade.
mm-hmm,
The displacement, the sorrow, the tragedy, the loss of loved ones and families. We can't ignore these things because side by side with those, by the way, comes not only the self-knowledge of knowing that this is part of the country I love. This is part of where I am,
mm-hmm,
and I have to acknowledge this, but also the brilliance of survival that comes along with people who have been so displaced. I think of the HBCUs, the Black colleges and universities. I'm embarrassed to say I can no longer remember what the H stands for,
mm,
but the network of colleges and universities, from Morehouse to you name it, that the Black community in the United States built,
mm-hmm,
right, as an
mm-hmm.
educational system for their children is, I think it's a brilliant story. So you don't appreciate that brilliance until you know the hard part of the story too,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
that overcame is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
yeah,
yeah. And, just to ignore it or say it didn't happen, or
right.
there, or, even today, I still see inequalities and well, the whole social justice, one of your passions, it's there's so much room for improvement, and by ignoring those stories, then I think the danger is that we then think it never happened, or we forget that it happened.
That's
Yeah.
right. This helps me return to my friend who's in the Penobscot Nation here.
Yeah.
Um, Talk about not knowing that things happen. People are often unaware, and I'll raise my hand.
Mm.
I need a lot of education on this still. Um, Often unaware of what the history of Indigenous peoples in their region of the country is. And that's true in Maine as well as anywhere else. This matters personally to me because, as I told you, my son is an Indigenous person
Mm.
from Peru. And it's extraordinarily important to know, to remember and know what happened way back in his lineage and to be proud of that lineage. Um, but my Penobscot friend has done tremendous research here in Maine on what has happened to the tribes and with the tribes, between the tribes in Maine over the last centuries. And she's uncovered some extraordinary information. I won't go into great detail,
Mm.
but some of it is very, very challenging art, and it's very hard for many people to hear and to absorb. But
Mhm.
as you say, how can you know who you are if you don't know this?
Right.
Talk about a displacement. What a grand displacement that was of the native peoples
Mm.
who were here before the rest of us. I'm not trying to undo everything that's happened. I am saying let's live with it and embrace it so that we can deal with one another decently
Hmm.
if we can.
Right. Yeah. And that, it takes work, I've found, but it is good work. It's necessary work. It'd be easy to say, well, it doesn't affect me, but maybe in some ways it does. But and I've noticed too that sometimes you really have to dig to find out some of these stories, because others have hidden them or ignored them, or and sometimes we like things just easily digestible and given to us, and so we don't have to put in the work. But I really have found value in trying to expand my own personal world system, and
Sure.
and to do that, not to pat myself on the back, but more to hit myself in the head, like, come on, wake up, there's more people in this world than just you, and
Right.
find out their story, and what can you learn from it. And it's been and it's been worth it. Really has been. Then you can begin, and maybe this is getting too political now, but instead of looking at people coming into the country as a pest or a nuisance or illegals, is like, no, these are people.
That's right.
And what is their story? Where are they coming from? Why are they even here?
Yes.
My great great grandparents, however many long ago, came over from Norway. I'm sure they had a good welcome here, but there may have been some, um, I don't racial something or other. I don't know. Probably not. Yeah. Just to stop seeing these people as, they're a nuisance. No, they're people and they're hurting. Yeah, there might be some criminals in there, but you know, most of what we're seeing a lot are people in need.
That's right.
And how can we treat them? How can we treat them like a person? I think that comes down to the value. Yeah.
I couldn't agree more clearly. And,
Mm.
um, you know, the people who were here, the indigenous peoples of this North American continent, are the only ones who aren't immigrants. The rest of us, down to the
Mm.
Mayflower and before, are. There
Yeah.
were a few, if you want to talk criminals, there were a few criminals on some of those boats too, I suppose.
Uh-huh.
I'm
Uh-huh.
not really, I'm not really interested I know why you brought that up, but I don't think it's really relevant to say, oh, there must be some criminals in that crowd. Time
Yeah.
out, folks. Time out. You're coming to a new land. You your own people, unless you are indigenous yourself, your own people came here the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I understand that there are many, many complex issues. I am a lawyer, by the way, as well, obviously, as well as a writer. There are many immigration-related issues around legalities and all the rest of it. I understand that. And I understand that our system needs some real work for a wide variety of reasons. But to turn one's back on the visitor, on the stranger, how many spiritual traditions tell you, open your arms, don't turn your back.
Mm-hmm.
Open your arms and your heart. It's almost a sacred relationship in certain faith traditions, is it not?
Mm-hmm.
To open your heart to the visitor. And as I said, the stranger. At a practical level, ironically, many people who are recent immigrants establish small businesses at a rate that exceeds those who have been here for a while. I mean, it's a very good economic proposition for many of us. I understand that there are complications there too. I'm not entirely blind to that, but I'm with you. And to return to my novella for just a minute, I think that I'm enjoying this. So do hear me saying that. One of the dynamics in the novella is the kind of push me, pull you, and the conflict almost between Nick's family, one of the narrators, the lawyer in the book, between his family that wants to assimilate and become American, just really do that in the 1950s and 60s, between him and Xanthi, who will never be American the same way, because what she longs to do is return to Greece and be with her family. She has come here in order to earn money to send back to Greece because the poverty was high, the earthquakes were devastating, the civil war had been catastrophic, and so forth. And so balancing who calls this home and why, and who doesn't call this home and why, and how all those things kind of mix into a really rich experience is part of the novella. She looks at what happens is Nick starts to read her letters. Once his daughter says, "Dad, how can you defend these people?" about his clients, he starts reading her letters. And it raises memories for him of his childhood in the Midwest. And so you get a lot of stories, many of them funny, I hope, about his growing up and admiring his own dad, who was a lawyer, and his mother, who was very wonderful, and doing crazy things with a cousin and getting himself in trouble, and all of those things. Alternating with the letters he reads from Xanthi and how it looked to her when she arrived in Union Station in Chicago with all her belongings in like 2 suitcases at her feet, dressed in black and a babushka, and what this assimilating family looked like to her, and how formidable it was for her to come to the United States where she did not speak the language, and came in order to help take care of Nick's mother, who had been ill for a while. So that's why Xanthi came over. And to try to fit into a culture that she did not really understand. In some of these letters, she says to her daughter, to whom the letters are addressed, I hope I will fulfill expectations here because I'm afraid of how they do things. They have these washing machines that have numbers on them that you have to set the dial, and I don't trust them. I think you do best when you wash clothes in the river and you can see with your hands how clean they are. But I'm supposed to use these machines. And here's the dryer that I'm also supposed to use. She gets through those things. And then she begins to see that the family is struggling with um, its assimilation, in the sense that the American dream is falling apart a little bit because the 1960s intervene. And there is
Yeah.
the Vietnam, right? And there is the Vietnam War. There is the assassination of Martin Luther King. There is the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And through Xanthi's eyes, you begin to see how the family's world is a little rocked, even though they really, really consider themselves American. And they are. And pretty soon it becomes clear that she has secrets in her past that help her help the family deal with some things that come up for them. And then she leaves. It's time for her to go back to Greece. And Nick, who is a teenager by then, is really heartbroken that she's leaving. And he confronts her about why she's screaming in the night. She's dreaming at night when she's about to leave, and he's hearing her scream. And that's the big secret of the book, what she tells him. So I'm not going to tell you now.
Okay. Oh man. Now I gotta go read. No.
Yeah, now you have to read it, right?
I definitely have to go read it now. Yeah.
And so he finds out through a variety of things of what it was like to be not an assimilating Greek American, but what would have happened perhaps had his grandparents not come over on the boat the way mine did. I had to do some research myself, speaking of learning about hard things. I had to research the Greek Civil War in order to write this book. I knew about it some, because of course my family knew about it, but we didn't talk about it that much, Art. We were very focused on getting an education and, as I said, becoming American. But the Greek Civil War was one of the most brutal of the 20th century. And Greece had been occupied by the Ottoman Turkish Empire for 400 years, from 1400 something to the mid 1800s, then acquired its independence. And then the early 20th century starts bringing world wars, right? At the same time, Greek is having a civil war kind of layered over the Second Civil War and alternating, the Second World War, excuse me, and alternating with it. It was a relentless series of wars, relentless. And I had to learn what it meant to live there at that time in order to write Xanthi in any way authentically. Greece was a pawn for many of the major powers. That happens a lot of places on the planet, and Greece was one of them. There was Stalin, there was the British, there were all kinds of dynamics going on. You don't know about yourself and your background until you know some of that. And it could have been so different, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
We might not be sitting here today.
Right. Yeah. Just one little thing could have changed it all. Yeah.
That's right.
I guess is there probably more than one, but is there like one lesson you would have us take away from your story, from your novella?
Oh, great question. I think I answer questions like that differently each time they're asked, but today I'll talk about justice. Because given my family background, everyone in my family is a lawyer. In my nuclear family, my mother died many years ago. And we have a lot of family conversations about fairness and justice. The injustice of living on this planet is unavoidable. Things are not always fair. And the law is not always the same thing as justice, by the way. It's often very different.
Yeah.
There's also the issue of mercy. which is, I think, is important to leaven justice with. In this book, what the main characters do is they struggle with their memories of each other, their deep love for one another, and how they have experienced injustice in their lives and what that means to them, and how they have experienced truth and lies and what those mean to them. And at the end of the book, the reader will decide what Xanthi left Nick with when she left the United States. But I think what's undeniable is that the love between them supersedes justice. There is a different form of it than the law provides. There is something that is deeper and almost inexpressible. And I think that that's where he stands by the end of the book.
Wow, it just sounds like a powerful story. So where can folks get it? They want to go to your website and it's for sale there?
Actually, it's for sale through a couple of independent bookstores. Thank you for asking. My website is www.stephaniecotsirilos.com. At my website, you'll see that there are links to 2 independent bookstores that carry the book. You can order the book online from those bookstores and they will give you shipping options. The publisher is a small, youthful press in California, so they operate exclusively through independent bookstores, and these are the ones that carry the book.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, I usually like to ask a couple of questions like, what's your favorite book and things like that. We are kind of running out of time. But I've really enjoyed this conversation immensely. But do you have just even a couple book recommendations for us before we go?
Sure. Great question. I have one in particular. It's called Night of the Living Res. It's written by Morgan Talty, who is a young man. He went to school with my son, oddly enough. But it has won the New England Book Award, and it longlisted for the Andrew Carnegie Prize in Fiction. It's about this young man's life on the Penobscot Reservation here in Maine. And it is the most elegant, compassionately written book. Some of it hard to read. He is getting national recognition and honors, and I couldn't recommend it more highly.
All right. Well, I'll add that to my TBR list too. So this is really at the end what I do this all for, is to get book recommendations. So
why not, right?
Yeah, right. Why not? Right. Yeah.
Right.
Well, I just want to thank you for giving your time today to talk about this, some really important matters. And, I just want to let everyone know that your story matters and you should share it. Even if it's a hard one, we can learn from it, and stories are powerful things.
Right.
And so, Stephanie, thank you for sharing yours today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, Art. Keep up the good work.
All right. Thank you. You too.
All right. Take care.